All right, so we talked about reading, we talked about math, we talked about English. Now we're going to talk about science. So, all right. So, trying to figure out in my mind how this is all going to go. So it'll probably take us 20 to 30 minutes to go over the science strategies, and then 35 minutes plus your break for you guys to take the test. So probably about an hour and a half total until we go over the test. So that'll be, so let's see, it's 1:30 now, 2:30, that'll be 3. So yeah, we'll probably have about an hour at the end to talk about the essay, I'm guessing. So let's start with the science. Science is like the reading in that it is one very time intensive. All right. So we say the science section seems intimidating, but in reality, it's just reading graphs in disguise. So you don't need advanced knowledge of biology, chemistry, or physics to do well, but I think it's a little misleading to say that you don't need knowledge at all. So I'm going to send you guys a link. To a section. Here's a good overview of some previous knowledge that has been asked on previous tests. And let's see if this is getting good. Maybe something like this would also be useful. Basically, you don't want to get caught off guard. And some of the questions that they ask kind of consistently about would be physics questions, like needing to know opposite and equal forces, for instance, or another topic they might ask about is like pH, and you should know that acids have a lower pH, 7 is neutral, and that bases have a high pH. Okay, or yeah, yes. Okay, so that sort of thing, it might be useful for you to look at some other resources to make sure that you kind of have some of the basics of these fields down. So if you've never taken physics, maybe search ACT physics knowledge that you need to know. Because you don't need to know, how to solve problems, physics problems the way you would solve them on a physics test at your high school or anything, but you do need to know how to solve them. Well, you do need to know the very basics. Okay, so. So question types, we have a data representation, research summaries, and conflicting viewpoints. So data representation, basically just passages where they have some tables and whatnot and ask you questions about the tables and graphs that are presented. Research summaries are the types of passages where you have, like experiment 1 and experiment 2, etc. So you have lots of different experiments which differ from one another, and you kind of have to figure out the difference between these. So you might have multiple passages, 45% of the questions look like that, 38% look like data rep. And lastly, the conflicting viewpoints, this is always one type of passage. Okay, so it's one type of passage, and so it's also kind of the black sheep, kind of like the literature passage was the black sheep in the reading section, where this passage is often seen as being the hardest passage. So we'll talk about slightly different strategies to use for the conflicting viewpoints. Okay. So here are the strategies. First one, go straight to the questions. 2, look for trends. 3, know your graph. 4, go straight to the questions and research summaries. 5, look for keywords in research summaries. 6, focus on similarities and differences in research summaries. 7, mark the passage. 8, look for keywords. 9, focus on similarities and differences in the conflicting viewpoints. And 10, do not be intimidated. So, you want to go straight to these questions and not read the passage beforehand. Okay, so unlike in the reading section where we need to have a main idea overview before we start answering questions, for the science section, it's actually going to be the opposite. We are going to want to go and look at the questions first, because the passages really, if we think the reading passages were boring, I mean, the science passages are even more boring, right? It's going to be hard to understand exactly what's going on if you don't have some sort of direct focus, okay? So what we do is we go to the questions, and the questions will refer to specific parts in the passage. And then when we go back to the passage and we're looking for something specific, it's easy to find, okay? So go straight to the questions, and first thing you want to do is you want to answer the specific questions, okay? So answer specific questions means specific questions are the questions that refer. So these refer to a specific table, graph, chart, etc. All right, I'm sorry, I'm getting really bad seasonal allergies today, so I apologize. Yeah, so answer specific questions first, okay? And then after you've answered the specific questions, you will have gained some understanding of the passage overall. And at that point, you can answer the broader questions, okay? So by the time that you've answered the specific questions, you will have probably read through some of the experiments, you would have looked over some of the charts, you would have a general understanding of what's going on. So then you'll be prepared to answer the broad questions, even though you never took the 2 minutes to actually read the passage in its entirety, okay? So you're going to kind of be reading on an as-need basis. Sometimes you'll end up reading through the whole passage, sometimes you won't. It really depends on the section. So data representation is looking at tables and graphs and analyzing the trends and patterns they contain. In other words, the tables and graphs will show you a cause and effect relationship in the data, and your job is to identify that relationship. You only need to understand the information from the graph, and no background knowledge is necessary. Right? So this is what I said was a little misleading, because I think that background knowledge is required on probably, I would say, 5-ish questions per test. Maybe less than that. But if you're really looking to get a perfect score, then you should really look at some of the resources that I sent you guys in the chat window. Okay. Look for trends. So, as X goes up, Y goes up, then I would be able to tell you that we had direct variation, okay? As X goes up, Y goes down, that would be indirect variation. If I say as X goes up, Y goes down, then up again, that is no specific type of variation, okay? So, looking for trends, the trends are showing relationship in the data. Graph types, exponential growth. So we should know exponential growth means we are increasing at an increasing rate. So not only are we getting bigger, if I have a line, it's always increasing, but we're increasing at an increasing rate. That means with each successive step, we're increasing by more than we did the step before. So here we're increasing very slowly, and then we start to increase quickly, and then we're going to start increasing at kind of an infinite pace. So increasing at an increasing rate is kind of a valuable concept for you guys to know. Trend graph types, logistic growth, sometimes referred to as an S-curve. This is kind of a more realistic exponential growth because it assumes that there's some sort of limiting factor that, prevents you from growing exponentially forever and ever. So, logistic growth, basically, we have something here called a critical point. And if you guys are in calculus or pre-calc even, maybe you may have heard of critical points, or an inflection point, which is basically kind of a point of change. So before this critical point, we're increasing exponentially, right? We're increasing rate. Now, one misconception that students might have is that after the critical point, they think you're starting to decrease. But that is not true. We are still increasing. We are just increasing now at a decreasing rate, right? So this is going to be increasing, but at a decreasing rate. As long as the y value continues to get bigger, we are increasing. Okay. Other data elements, extremes, and these are kind of bad examples because the extremes are just the endpoints. Extremes, mins and maxes in a parabola are obviously the vertexes and whatnot. Generalizing fitting a line to the data means if you have these data points, we can kind of draw a line, a best fit. And oftentimes on the test, it's going to ask you to, predict a y value given an x value that's not on the graph. So let's say that we knew up until x equals 5, and the test might ask us to predict. And the way we predict is by using a line of best fit. We extend the line. And I say, oh, at x equals 6, I'm going to be at this value. Know your graph. Be able to quickly identify the type, what it represents, patterns. So we'll talk about line graphs, scatter plots, bar graphs, pie charts. So a line graph shows the relationship between two variables, the independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent affects the dependent. So for example, if I say plant fertilizer affects plant growth, plant fertilizer is on the x-axis, plant growth is on the y-axis, right? It doesn't make sense that plant growth would affect how much fertilizer it had gotten, right? So always your independent is on your x and your dependent is on your y. Remember, independent means it doesn't depend on anything else. This is an interesting graph to look at. The scatter plot gets real data to fit on the xy plane. A line of best fit is matched to the data to describe its overall pattern. What about the scatter? What does the scatter plot here say about the relationship between speed and oxygen? So we should always have kind of a uniform method. We should always read the title, read the axes, and then interpret the trend. So in this case, the title is speed versus oxygen. And if I looked at it right away, I would say it looks like speed and oxygen consumption are inversely correlated. But if I think about that for a second, that doesn't really make sense, right? If you're running faster, you're probably consuming more oxygen per second, right? And we're going to assume this is oxygen consumption per second or something, or per minute, per time period. So minutes to run 15 miles is my x-axis, and oxygen consumption is my y-axis. So it turns out that this actually isn't going from slow to fast. If it takes me only 8 minutes to run a mile, I'm running fast. If it takes me 15 minutes, I'm running slow. So actually, when I'm slower, I use less oxygen, and when I'm faster, I use more. So speed and oxygen are directly correlated. Right? Kind of confusing. But make sure to read your titles, interpret the graph appropriately. Bar graphs and pie charts are sort of rare on the test because they are very easy to interpret. Really straightforward. So, for instance, this is the number of times each week that a teenager is reminded to do a chore. Number of reminders versus the frequency. So I would see that 5 reminders were needed for like 4 people. Right? Those people needed a lot of help to remember to do a chore. Here, a pie graph, pie chart, circle chart, pie chart. I can see, that favorites take up a little bit more than 50% of my, I have no idea what this could be referring to. My web page history, but I don't know how favorites factors into that. Yeah. Okay. So read the questions first. Like we said, they'll help you see what you're looking for in the graph or in the chart or in a table. Basically, reading the questions first is going to tell you what you need to be looking for. And that's why we answer the specific questions first, and then we'll go on to answer the more broad-based questions. All right. So read the specific questions first. They'll help. Well, read the questions first. You'll answer the specific ones before you answer the broad-based questions. Research summaries. You read summaries in order to determine what the experiment is testing and how the experiment is similar with other experiments. So it's important to understand all the parts of the experiment, the hypothesis and the independent and dependent variables, and especially the relationship between these variables. So remember, independent is, on your x-axis, dependent is on your y-axis. The research summaries, remember, are the passages where you have something like experiment 1, and then you have experiment 2, etc. So you really need to be paying attention to how experiment 1 differs from experiment 2 and vice versa. And a good way, just a good heads up on this, there's almost always the first sentence of the next experiment will tell you how it differs from the previous experiments. It'll say, experiment 2 repeated the techniques in experiment 1, except instead of water, we used hydrochloric acid or something like that. So, yeah, just a good tip, hint. Once again, go straight to the questions. Look for the following words to help you spot answers. You're going to be looking for different variables. You're going to be looking for different trends. Pretty straightforward. Look for changes between experiments to determine the effects of these changes. So that's why you should always be focusing on how experiments differed from one another. And when you figure it out, I always kind of write a note, like above experiment 2, I will say, used NaCl instead of some other salts, which I don't know a chemical formula for. Okay. So it's always good because so many of the questions will be asking about differences in the research summary passages that if you can identify them right away, you'll be in good shape. Okay. And then kind of lastly, what we'll talk about is the conflicting viewpoints passage. So conflicting viewpoints passage, like I mentioned before, is one passage. So it's just one passage. It has 7 questions. It comes in different varying spots in the science section. But we're going to treat this differently. Okay, so I'm going to treat conflicting viewpoints differently than all the other passages. So you have 6 passages total. So for 5 of them, your strategy is going to be go to the questions, answer specific questions first, then answer broad questions. Okay, for conflicting viewpoints, we're going to treat this like a reading passage, right? So for conflicting viewpoints, you'll have like scientist 1 and scientist 2 discussing a topic and disagreeing or offering a different viewpoint on something, okay? So reading 2 paragraphs related to the same topic and answer questions on the similarities, differences, and details of these arguments. So you want to read the arguments before you answer the questions because you do need to have the main idea whenever you're answering these questions, okay? So it's a little bit different. You are going to read, you're going to annotate, you're going to underline, you're going to be involved with the text just like you should be on the reading section. and we're going to focus on the arguments and not scientific jargon. So these passages, these arguments are probably going to be way over our head. I mean, they're very specific and in maybe a specific field of science that you're not familiar with. But we just need to look for, patterns and disagreements and how things relate to one another. We don't need to understand exactly the mechanics behind the actual argument, right? So scientific jargon means like the complex language that is being used that is specific to the problem at hand. And we don't need to get caught up in that. We just need to focus on the arguments, think about how they differ from one another. All right. So mark the passage. We want you to be an active reader. Just like in the reading section, you should be writing down key phrases, writing paragraph summaries, highlighting quotes. You can't really have a highlighter, so just underlining quotes, etc. You'll be looking for specifics when they ask about details, compare and contrast. You want to know how the arguments are different. And usually the two paragraphs kind of mirror each other. So, in paragraph 1, it'll give an argument, and the paragraph 2 will be in the same format, but like their argument will be inserted in the places where the other argument was. So it can be quite simple to see how they differ from one another. All right. Extension and prediction. How would scientist 1 feel about this? How would scientist 2 feel about this? So that's why you really have to understand their arguments in order to be able to answer these sort of questions. Look for keywords that stand out as important in the passage. You write down and remember these words when reading the questions. These words will serve as beacons that can help you quickly locate other pieces of information in the passage. Make sure to look out for parts of the second paragraph which directly contradict the first. So like I said, these are usually in sort of a format that mirrors one another. So not too hard to see these differences. And remember, if you can circle parts before seeing questions, you will potentially anticipate their answers. So when we're actively reading, we should always be asking ourselves questions like, all sorts of questions. How would he maybe feel about this? Or what does this mean? Or how does this compare to this? It keeps you engaged and it keeps you perhaps anticipating questions. And then finally, our last strategy for the science section is don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated by the scientific language because it's really not relevant. This really is a data interpretation section. You don't need previous knowledge except for maybe 4 to 5 questions, which is very basic stuff. The questions, for instance, that I need help with the previous knowledge would probably be the biology because I've only taken biology in high school, so I've forgotten a lot of that sort of stuff. But for the other sections, I've taken chemistry and physics outside of high school, and for me, just like the basic understandings of that knowledge helps me here. And I think the basic knowledge you learn in high school for chemistry and physics will obviously help you as well. So don't be intimidated. Focus on cause and effect arguments being made and how you can identify them. Mark the passage. Look for keywords. Focus on similarities and differences, and you should be good to go. All right. So let me flip back to the very beginning of these strategies so you guys can have them, be aware of them while you're working on the science portion of the test. So that is what we have up next. We have the science portion. So that's the one section I haven't done. You're going to have completed an entire ACT this weekend. So once again, time yourself for 45 minutes. Time yourself for 35 minutes. But let's be back in 45 minutes. So I'll build in your break in here as well to go over the answers. Okay, so be back at 2:45 Mountain Time. Okay, and then we'll have about an hour left to talk about the essay. Okay, see you guys soon. All right, guys, welcome back. Almost done with your 12 hours of ACT weekend. So, let's go ahead and go over the science. Or it looks like there's only one person left. That's okay. That's what happens in here. All right, so I will put down the answers. And you guys tell me if you would like to go over any of them. So, first passage was about flies. So, answer choice or question 1 is C. 2 was G. 3 was D. 4 G. 5 C. 6 F. And 7 A. All right. Any questions from the first passage then? All right. Passage 2, number 8 was F. Number 9 was D. 10 was J. And by the way, this was the conflicting viewpoints. So this is the one you should have treated slightly differently. $11 was C. 12 was F. 13 was B. And 14 was F. All right, so conflicting viewpoints. Questions on this one? So 15 was C, 16 was F, 17 was B, 18 H, 19 B, and 20 J. All right. Number 21 is D. Number 22 is F. Number 23 was B. And number 24 was J. This one was a physicsy one. Number 25 was B. Number 26 is H. Number 27 is A, 28 J, 29 C, 30 is F, 31 is B, 32 is G, and 33 was D. Okay, 34 H, 35, wait, sorry, wrong page. 34 was J, 35 A, 36 is H, 37 B, 38 F, 39 D, and 40 is J. So now is your opportunity to ask about any of the questions on the test, science section, English section, math section, whatever section. Now is your opportunity. So does anybody have any questions? We did an entire test, almost all of it today. You went like 9 minutes over. Okay, so you need to just work on your timing. So for the science section, yeah, absolutely. In the science section, you know, if you had all day to do it, most students would do a lot better. So hopefully it's, you know, when you're timing yourself, or if you're going to do practice during the week, Katrina, make sure to be timing yourself so that you can really start to get a feeling for what's going to be happening on the test. Yeah, basically with the science, were you going straight for the questions? Did you try that out? That usually helps save students quite a bit of time. I see. Yeah. So the first time that you go straight for the questions, you might not be as good at, you know, extracting the information the first time as you would. So remember, with all these strategies, it does take a little bit of practice. So hopefully you guys will be able to practice one more time during the week at least before your test on Saturday. So you'll be able to work out these sort of quirks if you do some practice. But yeah, science is known for being really tough on the timing. Absolutely. Yeah, I can send you guys a couple more. I can do that right now. I think that you guys get access to our dashboard, right? And I think they loaded like 5 tests in there for you guys. These tests that I'll send you right now are more recent tests. So from that perspective, it's kind of nice. Let's see, there's a test, and here's a test. So these are both from the past 2 years, from the past year. But also another thing that I would recommend is there is the big ACT. Show you guys what it looks like. The official ACT prep book from Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. This has 3 recent tests in it. And the reason I say recent is because the test has sort of evolved over time. The nice thing about doing tests out of here is there are answers in here. The test that I just sent you, they're not going to have explanations. The answers will be at the end, but there are no explanations. So, That's a nice thing about the red book. And you want to be practicing with tests from 2015 and 2016. Really, no tests before that. Okay. So, are any of you guys planning on taking the essay? Katrina is. It looks like Michaela, no. All right, so I'm going to talk about the essay for the last hour of class. So if you're not taking the essay, then you might not stay around. All right, you believe you're taking the essay. That's good. Then I'll have two people to talk to. um, add more thing. Yes. All right. So let's talk about the essay. So should you take the essay? Yes. Most good schools require it. Unless you know that you're applying to a school that does not want it, and you know that you're not going to want to branch out and apply to other schools, that's the only way that you might not want to take it. Otherwise, you really should take it because most good schools require it. And if you decide later you want to apply to a school that does require it, you have to retake the whole test. You can't just take the essay. So it might be a good idea to take the essay. I'm going to bring up, this is an example prompt. So we're going to kind of look at this prompt and then we can go back through the slides together as well. But I'm going to read through the prompt a couple of times so that, well, I'll read it through once now and then we'll read through it again as we move through the essay slides. Okay. So, intelligent machines. Many of the goods and services we depend on daily are now supplied by intelligent, automated machines rather than human beings. Robots build cars and other goods on assembly lines, where once there were human workers. Many of our phone conversations are now conducted not with people, but with sophisticated technologies. We can buy goods at a variety of stores without the help of a human cashier. Automation is generally seen as a sign of progress, but what is lost when we replace humans with machines? Given the accelerating variety and prevalence of intelligent machines, it is worth examining the implications and meanings of their presence in our lives. So, we're going to read and carefully consider these three perspectives. Each suggests a particular way of thinking about the increasing presence of intelligent machines. So, perspective one. What we lose with the replacement of people by machines is some part of our own humanity. Even our mundane daily encounters no longer require from us basic courtesy, respect, and tolerance for other people. Perspective two. Machines are good at low-skill, repetitive jobs and at high-speed, extremely precise jobs. In both cases, they work better than humans. This efficiency leads to a more prosperous and progressive world for everyone. Perspective three. Intelligent machines challenge our long-standing ideas about what humans are or can be. This is good because it pushes both humans and machines towards new, unimagined possibilities. Okay. So finally, the task is to write a unified, coherent essay in which you evaluate multiple perspectives on the increasing presence of intelligent machines. In your essay, be sure to analyze and evaluate the perspectives given, state and develop your own perspective, explain the relationship between your perspective and those given, and your perspective may be in full agreement with any of the others, impartial, or wholly different. And we're going to kind of focus on that being different. But whatever the case, support your ideas with logical reasoning and detailed, persuasive examples. All right. So that's what you're going to get on test day. You're going to get something that looks like this. All right. So prep expert essay, ACT essay lesson. So first thing we say is to keep the value of the essay in context. The value of the essay really is just to do it because many schools require it. But the grade you receive on it is not really that important. So we kind of say, it doesn't affect your composite score, your score out of 36, which you get from averaging your 4 section scores. Okay. At most, the essay may add a plus or minus to your composite score. So we kind of say, I believe the essay is out of 12 points. If you get a 11 on your essay and you got a 35 on the test, maybe that's like a 35 plus. But if you got like a 4 on your essay, maybe you got like a 35 minus. So it's not really a big deal. But if you do good, you might set yourself apart because most students don't really prepare for the essay and aren't really aware what the essay is about. And so if you have some idea going in, it can be really valuable. So, for example, compare it to class grades if a particular admissions committee considers your composite score an A, B, C, or D in the context of their average applicant. Generally, the most your essay score will make your B a B plus or a B minus. All right. So it's not completely vital, but it is required by many schools. Okay. So we're going to also make sure we're applying many of the same strategies we applied to the writing section, which was, we talked about removing redundancy, implementing proper punctuation, using our knowledge of grammar, all this sort of stuff we need to use on the test as well. Okay. So there are 4 scoring categories for the test. The first is ideas and analysis. Essay graders want to see you have a unique and thorough grasp of the issue. 2, development and support. Want to see persuasive argument based on evidence and examples. 3, organization. Adhere to rules covered in the English and reading sections. And 4, language use and conventions. Adhere to rules, strategies covered in English and reading sections. So organization is really going to mean you are going to want to have 5 paragraphs. You're going to want to have a clear thesis. You want to have an intro and a conclusion as part of your 5 paragraphs. This is kind of what the organization is being based on. Language use and conventions, anything from spelling to subject-verb agreement. To using modifiers right, your punctuation, all this sort of stuff is going to be part of the language use and conventions. Okay. So these 2 sections are pretty easy to cover. All right. What you need to learn to maximize are your ideas and analysis and development and support scoring sections. So ideas and analysis, essay graders want to see you have a unique and thorough grasp of the issue. They want to make sure that you understand what the prompt was asking you to do, right? And that you have a thesis that addresses the prompt in a unique way. Okay. And then development and support, we want to make sure we're supplying lots of evidence and examples. One place you can get examples is going to be here. You see here we say phone conversations are with technologies. We have self-checkout at the store. All this these examples are things we could talk about in our essay. Okay, so how do we write a response maximizing the ideas and analysis and the development and support categories? Okay. So, in general, these 2 scores will be maximized by constructing a broad-based and nuanced thesis. So this is going to be sort of our theme for the essay, broad-based, nuanced. And supporting this thesis / argument with evidence. But the difference between receiving a 5 or a 6, so basically all the sections are graded, I think, on a 1 to 6, and then somehow it becomes a score out of 12. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But basically, think of a 5 as a really good score and a 6 as a perfect score. Okay. So the difference between a 5 and a 6 will depend on your ability to develop a unique thesis and develop a response to the entire issue or question posed by the prompt from an overarching viewpoint. Okay. So overarching, nuanced, broad-based, these are the themes that we're going to talk about that you need to focus on when writing your essay. So we'll go over a couple misconceptions. First, don't refer to or quote a perspective anywhere in your essay. Okay. So basically what we're saying is, yes, you want to talk about each of these, but you don't want to reference them by the name of the perspective. So if I say perspective 1 says this, or in perspective 2, they argue this. we want to avoid that because it makes your essay sound quite narrow. It makes your essay sound like you can't see beyond the fact that this is a perspective given to you in a prompt. You want to just state what the perspective said without referencing it. So say, you know, you could quote directly or paraphrase these perspectives. So, you know, what we lose with the replacement of people by machines is some part of our own humanity. Blah, 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 blah. But don't say perspective one says this. So, so that's a good question, Katrina. um, I probably would. So it's kind of awkward to say, yeah, don't say in perspective one they say this, but maybe if you quote directly, you might put just in parentheses perspective one. The quoting formatting is very lax here because it is a rough draft. So don't worry too much about it. This sort of stuff could make your essay longer, which is always a good thing. You're trying to maximize kind of the length of your essay. But in general, we want to make it sound like these ideas are kind of our own ideas, even not something that was given to us in a prompt. So you just don't want to narrowly refer to them by their perspectives. You want to always refer to them in their broader sense. Also, don't ever use bigger words for the sake of using bigger words. The essay is where you can display vocab skills, but only do so if it fits the tone and is actually the better word to use. So using a synonym that is a bigger word but isn't better than the simpler one will really hurt you because it'll stick out kind of like a sore thumb. If you want to improve your vocabulary, I definitely recommend that. Standardized essays are interesting because they are trying to grade you in a standardized way. So, for instance, they can't grade you based on creativity because creativity is not a objective measure, right? So they're trying to grade you on solely objective measures. So like how much you wrote, for example, is going to be something they can grade you on. Your vocab is something they can grade you on. Having proper organization is something they can grade you on. But they're really not supposed to think about like you creatively because then the standard for that is more wishy-washy. Yeah, so Katrina, but if we make them our own, then how can we differentiate the perspective we make? So that'll become a little bit more clear coming up. If you still have that question at the end, you can ask again, but I think I'm going to clarify your question in the upcoming slides. Okay, so don't use first person for the same reason that it makes your essay seem very narrow-minded. Only exception is, you know, if you're saying our or we, Americans, humankind, if you're making it sound very broad-based, then you can use kind of first person. Don't use personal anecdotes because once again, that makes your essay seem very narrow-focused. So if you want to use a personal story, frame it as a hypothetical, okay? Instead of saying, this happened to me, one time I tried to call my credit card company and I could never get through to a person and the robots kept messing up and then my credit card got charged $1,000 or something like that. If you have a story that you want to tell that's relevant, instead of saying this happened to me, say imagine this, or people these days have issues with this. Look at all these problems. So you can frame them as being hypothetical and not necessarily focused on just your own. Okay. Don't pay attention to this because it's confusing. But don't use words like believe, argue, or hold. You want to always be stating things as if they are a fact. Okay. So don't use words like believe, argue, or hold because they make it sound like your arguments are just your beliefs and not a fact. Okay. And that makes them less strong. Do politicians say, I believe this is true, or do they say this is true? They say this is true because They are trying to make the most powerful argument they can, right? They never let you know if something is their opinion or if it's actually a fact, because they just always act like everything is a fact, because then they seem much more convincing. So you want to do the same thing in your essay. You want to act like everything you say is a fact, that everything you say is true. And so don't say, I believe this or I think that, because it weakens your argument. Okay. So simply say, when you're stating your thesis, don't frame it in the sense that this is something that you believe. Frame it in the sense that it is something that is true. All right, then we say don't ever use your eraser. The appearance doesn't matter of your essay because it is a first draft. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because the appearance does matter. You want to make sure that your handwriting is clear, that the grader can read exactly what you are writing. But by appearance doesn't matter, we're saying that it is a first draft. So if you have a sentence that you don't want, just cross it out with a line. Okay, don't scribble and erase and have eraser marks all over the place. So it should look like a rough draft, but a rough draft still means that you need to have good handwriting. Because believe me, as somebody that has graded for high school students before, bad handwriting puts the grader in a bad mood, and a grader in a bad mood will grade your essay differently than a grader in a good mood. Okay, so keep that in mind. Handwriting does matter, but if you need to insert a new word, you can just put a little caret, right? Cross out entire sentences if they're repetitive. Especially, it might be true that a grader would reward you for crossing out a sentence that was redundant because they saw you had the discipline to cross out a sentence, which can be quite difficult to do. And whatnot. So don't purposely write sentences that are redundant so you can cross them out. But basically, we're saying this is a rough draft. Cross out stuff that you don't think you need by the end. Don't erase. Let the grader see what your writing process was. Okay. So we are going to recommend that you write 3 to 4 full pages. So one thing we want to say is don't fill all 4 pages by writing bigger letters or repeating yourself. There's an MIT study that shows that there is a correlation between better essay scores and the length of an essay. Obviously, it's not by the virtue of the essay being longer that it gets a better grade. It's because longer essays usually have more insights, more examples, more analysis, right? So smarter students generally have more to say. But if you're writing 4 pages of rambling repetitiveness, that's going to be worse than an essay that wrote the same thing in 1 page. Okay, so you want to write as much as you can because shorter or longer essays have more examples and have more to say, more analysis. They're generally going to get higher scores, but don't ramble. Make sure everything you are saying has a purpose. So remember I said that 5 was a good score, 6 was like a perfect score. So if you scored a 5, you answered the question, made a persuasive and cohesive argument with little or no grammar errors. But if you scored a 6, you separated yourself and took the next step. So how to score a 6 in these 2 grading subjects? First, the entire essay wasn't only geared on answering the question. Instead, you argued as if the answer was already obvious and framed your argument looking at the bigger picture and answered the why. It's not fair, but the reader will grade your essay within 7 seconds of reading your response. True. Making a good first impression. If you do, they will read the rest of your essay through rose-colored glasses. And in general, your final score will reflect this first impression. Remember, your handwriting does create some of this first impression. So, remember that these graders are reading hundreds of essays, and so you need your essay to stand out quickly in order for it to, make an impact. So let's talk about those 2 things that were on the slide there, which were pretty much like talking about ways to maybe get the attention One thing that we say that you could do in your opening paragraph to make your essay seem interesting is to maybe talk about something slightly controversial related to the topic, and it doesn't have to be something you believe. It doesn't have to be something that is going to relate directly to your thesis, but it can be something to kind of catch a reader's attention. Okay, so if I want to think about something controversial with respect to intelligent machines, I could say something like, Stephen Hawking says that capitalism is the greatest threat to society in a world run by machines. So obviously this statement is sort of controversial because our country is very capitalistic. And this statement is kind of, challenging it and saying, is it a good idea to have a society based on capitalism when machines are doing all the work? Because in capitalism, how will money get distributed in a capitalistic society run by machines? Okay. I could say something like, machines, non-immigrants, are taking all the factory jobs. Right? So this is something that's particularly maybe interesting at the moment. Who's taking factory jobs? Machines, right? It's harder to demonize machines than it is to demonize people, but maybe this is a controversial topic you could kind of start off with. I could start off with something like, what is the human, or something like, do humans have an obligation to work? Like, if everything we needed to be done could be done by machines, do humans have an obligation to work? Do we think that work is more than just a paycheck? Is work something that gives us self-worth? Or does work take away from valuable time we could spend doing something we actually like? So do humans really have an obligation to work? Throughout history, we've had to work, but what happens when we don't have to work anymore? Right? Or something like, in Finland, the government is experimenting with universal basic income to combat lost wages due to automation. So this could be controversial because the idea of universal basic income is basically saying that everybody, regardless of if you work or not, gets a certain income each month, and it's supposed to offset problems from people who can't find jobs in the future, now and in the future, because all their jobs have been taken over by the cheap labor of machines. So kind of interesting to talk about. Katrina, good question. Most students tell me that their teachers do not like that. And considering that most graders of the ACT writing are going to be teachers, I would probably say to just avoid it. I don't personally know why that's an issue. But I think there are better ways to get people's attention that won't make your teachers mad. Because yeah, I've had several students tell me that their teachers do not appreciate or have told them not to use questions at the beginning. So here's a list of controversial topics you can maybe talk about with regards to intelligent machines, right? Just to get the reader's attention, or to show that you have some understanding and former knowledge of the topic, right? But next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure you read the prompt twice. So let's read this prompt again. Many of the goods and services we depend on daily are now supplied by intelligent, automated machines rather than by human beings. Robots build cars and other goods on assembly lines, where once there were human workers. Many of our phone conversations are now conducted not with people, but with sophisticated technologies. We can now buy goods at a variety of stores without the help of a human cashier. Automation is generally seen as a sign of progress, but what is lost when we replace humans with machines? Given the accelerating variety and prevalence of intelligent machines, it is worth examining the implications and meaning of their presence in our lives. Perspective 1. What we lose with the replacement of people by machines is some part of our own humanity. Even our mundane daily encounters no longer require from us basic courtesy, respect, and tolerance for other people. Machines are good at low-skill, repetitive jobs and high-speed, extremely precise jobs. In both these cases, they work better than humans. This efficiency leads to a more prosperous and progressive world for everyone. Perspective 3. Intelligent machines challenge our long-standing ideas about what humans are or can be. This is good because it pushes both humans and machines towards new, unimagined possibilities. Okay, so what we should do while we're reading the perspectives is we're going to start grouping them. So perspective 1 is pretty negative, right? It doesn't have a good view on intelligent machines. Perspective 2 is pretty positive, and perspective 3 is pretty positive. Now, basically, what we're going to want to do is group these into two categories. We are going to use these two perspectives to support our thesis, which we haven't developed yet. And we're going to use this guy as rebuttal. So rebuttal is going to be, you acknowledge the other side's argument, but then argue why their argument is wrong, right? So you might be thinking, well, what if I don't want to argue that intelligent machines are a good thing? What if I want to argue this? I guess you really can if you want. You might use both of these as rebuttal and use this as your support and more of your own examples. But for me, whenever I look at this, I could really go either way. Just on this, I have not developed a firm opinion. Sometimes I'm very frustrated with intelligent machines, and sometimes I think that they're awesome. And I think what I ultimately think is that if we do things correct, intelligent machines could make the lives of humans better. If we do it incorrectly, we can make a lot of people really poor. We can make we could ruin a lot of our societal norms. So I think it could go either way depending on how it's implemented. So, for me, I could really argue either way. And what basically reading through these perspectives tells me is that, well, in this case, they made it easy. I'm just going to support intelligent machines for the purposes of this essay. Okay. So we're going to use these two as support. This is rebuttal. And what we want to do is come up with a thesis that is sort of overarching. And so if I'm trying to think about a thesis that is somewhat overarching here, I might write something that is like, intelligent machines will make it possible for humans to work less on mundane tasks and work more on interesting. Intelligent machines will make it possible for humans to work less on mundane tasks and work more on interesting, progressive problems. Right. So this is my thesis. So this doesn't have to do with any of these actual perspectives. This is my own thesis. But what I'm going to do now is relate each of these perspectives to my thesis, right? So, maybe I start off with saying, do humans have an obligation to work? Some people may say yes. Some people may say no. Some people believe that it's more than just a paycheck. I believe, what intelligent machines really mean is that humans will have to work less on mundane tasks and will be able to work more on interesting, progressive problems. Okay, so that's going to be my thesis. And I'm going to have one paragraph where I use this as support. So this says, machines are good at low-skill, repetitive jobs and at high speed, extremely precise jobs. In both cases, they work better than humans. So yeah, maybe my first support paragraph will be that humans can easily be outdone by machines on repetitive tasks. And so it's better to let them handle it, right? So let them handle that part, and I'll work on something that I actually want to work on. And then maybe my next paragraph will be about, I think perspective 3 is already quite broad-based. And so, if I'm going to use perspective 3 as evidence, I could really just talk about, humans are always looking to take the next step. This is I could write how this is like the natural next chapter in human history. And say, the natural next chapter is for us to put aside doing tasks that don't matter. What we're going to be doing now, what humans will be doing now, are things that matter. Maybe to you, that's spending time with your family. Maybe for someone else, it's writing literature that is to the enjoyment of thousands of people. Maybe for others, it's cancer research, but none of us are going to need to be working on assembly lines or in mundane tasks any longer. So maybe then I'll use perspective 3 as part of my evidence for this. Although both of these paragraphs are supposed to be sort of overarching as well. And so I want to pull in more examples than just this perspective, right? So I want to maybe bring in, right now the phone technology with machines isn't great, but I assume it'll get better. And so I could talk about that, about how humans can be easily outdone by machines. And then the natural next chapter, I could talk a little bit about human progress thus far. We've moved from needing a horse-drawn carriage to being able to drive, to being able to fly. And what's next? It's going to be being able to be in a self-driving car, right? So all this stuff, I want to relate it to my thesis of how intelligent machines will make it possible for humans to work less on mundane tasks. And then my third paragraph is going to be a rebuttal. So I'll say, while I acknowledge that, replacing people with machines may make some of our daily encounters more mundane, that doesn't matter when I look at the big picture, right? It's okay if I go to the grocery store and don't talk to anybody. If in the big picture I get to spend more time with my family and get to spend more time working on things that matter to me and are important to society rather than being mundane. Okay, so with your rebuttal, you always want to kind of frame it as to, I understand. It's always important for you to understand the other side's argument. But if you really believe in what you're saying, and if you're writing so that you can convince people that you believe what you're saying, you can acknowledge the other side, but then say, but here's why you're wrong. Okay. So this is kind of an example of how you might frame your essay. You can see this is very broad-based because this takes this thesis is overarching, overarching over the other perspectives that are given. And then I can use the perspectives as evidence or as rebuttal. Okay. So that's kind of how we make them our own, Katrina. Like, we're going to end up using the perspectives as support or as rebuttal to our overarching thesis. Okay. So it'll be one component to what we're talking about. Yeah, it is. A bit of an argumentative essay. You're arguing for your perspective. Absolutely. So basically, I'm going to repeat everything we just said on the next couple slides. So aside from the tactics previously mentioned, there are countless other ways to achieve the goal of getting your reader's attention. You need to do this in the intro paragraph, but you could do something, cite something controversial or come up with some other hook. I think we kind of all decided that we don't want the hook to be necessarily a question, but something that draws the reader in. So if you don't make a good first impression, remember your essay will be held to a higher standard to upgrade the score the grader originally thought you would receive. So basically, if you make a bad first impression, you put yourself in a hole that you have to dig yourself out of. So stand out immediately with great vocab, a unique approach to the prompt, and most importantly, a nuanced and overarching thesis. So the biggest mistake students make is to read the prompt and perspectives and immediately form their own opinion and tie themselves to the argument and begin formulating the argument. You don't want to do this. What we should be doing is reading the prompt and perspectives twice before doing anything. Okay. So that's what we did. We read it once. Then we talked about the essay a little bit. We read it again. And the second time, you should be thinking about how could I make an overarching thesis, right? So if you read the prompt, and especially the three perspectives analytically and objectively, you will see that all three perspectives address at least two different underlying themes about the prompt or issue. For example, while first reading the perspectives, ignore specific arguments and focus on these underlying themes that connect all the perspectives. And here we would notice that this was negative, these two are positive, so these two sort of go together, and this one is kind of an outlier. Okay. So if you read the prompt in three perspectives objectively, you'll see the underlying themes, and make one of these underlying themes that connects all the perspectives the basis of your thesis. So depending on the prompt, choose the theme that can best use two perspectives as support and one as rebuttal. Makes it the easiest. From theme to thesis, don't choose one of the given perspectives given as your thesis because that's too obvious. Like we said, you want to take a step back and kind of create a thesis that encompasses all of the perspectives given. So adopt a theme that can be turned into an argument in whichever way encompasses all the perspectives so that you end up referencing two as examples and one as rebuttal. Now that you've adopted the theme, skim the prompt again with the theme in mind, and you'll find that the prompt itself provides examples or leads that you can develop in an overarching thesis. All right, so you might have to kind of, read through these a couple times and really think, what are the threads that tie these perspectives together? So then the organization, you want your intro paragraph to be, I really would say, at least 4 to 5 sentences. Make sure not to be overly dramatic. This is something that high school students tend to do when they're writing essays, is make their essay seem like it is a life or death situation, which is kind of silly. So don't do that. Make sure you're using language appropriate to the topic so that you don't make it seem too dramatic. All right. And then depending on the prompt and the thesis you choose, you want to interweave the two supporting arguments in the first 2 body paragraphs as your supporting evidence for your thesis. Right here, I said to kind of, you can make 2 different paragraphs based on the themes of these perspectives and add examples. But you could also interweave these perspectives in both paragraphs if you have other paragraph topics you want to talk about. Where applicable, but definitely at the end of each paragraph, always look towards the future and try to include specific evidence as to why your argument does so. Try to provide evidence of past or reoccurring problems and their ramifications unless your warnings are heeded. So you always want to make your argument sound like, if we want to go the other direction, that's a bad thing. If we try to put a stop to intelligent machines, what's bad can happen? We will lose our sense of being human because we always are looking towards progress, and we can't just stagnate progress because we're scared of the unknown, example. And then remember, your rebuttal argument is important, but spend only a sentence or 2 addressing the argument and immediately and categorically declare it to be false, and support this by including examples that you have that show why that argument is bad. It's like, I actually enjoy going to the grocery store and not having to talk to the cashier. Maybe that's part of your argument for why it doesn't matter if some of the mundane tasks or mundane human interactions every day are replaced by machines. All right. No matter what, argue with evidence why the overall negatives of the rebuttal stance far outweigh the positive repercussions of your argument. Remember to always have a conclusion. You'll get points off if you're missing an intro or conclusion. So really, the concluding paragraph should be just a kind of regurgitation of your intro paragraph. Restate the thesis, but instead of simply rearranging words, turn your argument into something that will leave the readers with something to remember. So maybe turn your argument into a call to action. We must move forward with society. We must ensure that the mundane tasks of today are never the mundane tasks of the future. You don't have to do this, but these are just some examples of things you can do in a concluding paragraph. Use writing devices covered previously, such as rhetorical questions or alliteration, which can be very powerful and memorable at the end of a persuasive essay. And if you're going to do a call to action, this is a place where, like a we could be appropriate because you're talking about we in a very broad sense, not just like we as in like me and my mom, but like we as in everybody. And end of conclusion. As you're finally getting to your concluding paragraph, try to keep this metaphor in mind. Think of your entire argument so far as a baseball you have molded based on evidence and logical reasoning. And at the end of your conclusion paragraph, knock that baseball out of the park, sending your argument and its implications into the world, leaving your reader with something to remember and ponder. That will put the exclamation point after your 6 instead of 5. Okay. So, basically, if I have to sum this up in a couple slides, one is you want to have an overarching thesis that encompasses the 3 perspectives. You want to use 2 thingamabobs as support. Use 2 of the perspectives as evidence, and the 3rd as rebuttal. Have a catchy intro. Have good handwriting. Spend time planning. So you really should take, 5 minutes to plan all this out. That'll just make your writing flow better, make your essay, you won't get stuck while you're writing if you've planned, and you're not going to have awkward transitions like somebody who just started writing without thinking about what they were going to write. And I mean, really, that's it. Make a good first impression, have good handwriting, have a catchy intro. Use 2 of the perspectives of evidence, and the 3rd is rebuttal. You want to have an overarching thesis that encompasses the 3 perspectives. So, if you guys look at those other practice tests I sent, you'll see that there are more essay prompts for you guys to look at. Any questions about, or something I didn't go over, or something that was unclear about the essay? Bet you guys are ready to be done with your weekend ACT boot camp. All right, well, if there are no questions about that, are there questions about anything? Or Katrina, I see you're typing. Go ahead. Oops. I was going to say, okay, no problem. Well, I hope you guys learned something this weekend. And good luck next week. Keep practicing with the strategies. That's really the most important thing you can do. Or if you want to change your grade, if you want to change your score, you have to change the way you take the test. And so keep that in mind while you continue to practice. And remind yourself of the strategies before you practice, or else you may never end up using them, right? So before you start reading, say, oh yeah, I need to make paragraph summaries and I need to try to read with enthusiasm. Before the English section, you review the punctuation and the grammar stuff we talked about. For the science, make sure you remember you're going to read the questions first, except for the conflicting viewpoints. Blah, 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 blah. So refresh your memory before you guys practice, okay? So besides that, I don't think we have anything else to talk about, so you guys are free to go a little bit early today. You're welcome, Katrina. Thank you. Thank you for coming. You are welcome. Good luck on Friday. or Saturday.